I was still dripping from the shower, steam clinging to my skin, clutching the towel tighter around me when it happened, that sharp knock against the door. At first, I froze, unsure if I'd even heard it right over the fading hum in my ears. But then it came again, louder this time, more urgent. My heart picked up, each beat echoing in my chest. Who could it be? At this hour? Standing there, half hidden behind the bathroom frame, every nerve in me felt exposed. I thought about ignoring it, letting whoever it was just walk away, but something in the way they knocked made me hesitate. My fingers tightened on the towel, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to think about. And then, without even realizing it, I took a step toward the door. The sound of the knock still echoed in my ears as I stood frozen, my bare feet pressing against the cool tiles, the damp air from my shower wrapping around me like a fog I couldn't escape. My breathing slowed to a careful, shallow rhythm, as if even the smallest sound from me would somehow be heard by the person outside. The towel clung to my skin, every drop of water that trickled down my arm or along my collarbone making me more aware of just how vulnerable I was in that moment. I glanced toward the hallway, its dim light spilling faintly toward the bathroom doorway, but it offered no answers, no comfort. I couldn't tell if the knocking had been sharp enough to signal urgency or soft enough to be a mistake. My mind instantly started painting faces, neighbors, strangers, friends I hadn't seen in months. Each possibility seemed both too far-fetched and somehow too possible. My pulse was erratic, my chest tight, as though my body couldn't decide whether it should prepare to run or to open the door. I shifted my weight, trying not to let my toes squeak against the wet floor, straining to listen. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Then came another knock, slower this time, but heavier, like the weight behind it carried something unspoken. The sound seemed to seep into me, stirring something I couldn't name, a feeling that was equal parts curiosity and unease. I glanced toward the mirror, my reflection staring back at me, damp hair clinging to my cheeks, eyes wide and unsure. In the glass, I could almost see my hesitation, every instinct telling me not to answer, every memory reminding me of times I should have acted and didn't. That tug-of-war in my chest grew tighter. I thought about just calling out, asking who it was, but my voice felt trapped somewhere behind my ribs. There was a strange finality to that knock, as if whoever stood there wouldn't be back again if I ignored them now. I pictured them turning away, the sound of their retreating footsteps echoing in the hall, and for some reason, the thought left a hollow ache in my stomach. My fingers brushed the edge of the bathroom door frame as I stepped forward, testing the distance between me and the front door in my head, 5 steps to the hallway, another 4 to the entryway. Close enough to get there quickly, far enough to change my mind before I reached it. I took in the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock from the living room, all of it so ordinary, yet laced with a sense that something extraordinary was waiting on the other side of that door. My heart beat faster, not just from fear, but from the quiet, unshakable sense that my life was about to tilt in some way I couldn't yet see. I gripped the towel tighter, every thread digging into my palm, and I knew I had to make a choice, to stay hidden in the warmth of the bathroom or to step into whatever waited beyond that knock. And without quite meaning to, I let my feet carry me forward, one slow step at a time, toward the sound that had already changed something inside me. The hallway felt colder than the bathroom, the air sharper against my damp skin as I stepped out, each footfall slow and deliberate, like I was afraid the floor itself might betray me with a creak. My heart was still racing, but now there was something else in it, a strange anticipation, as if I was walking toward a moment I had somehow been expecting my whole life without knowing it. I could still smell the faint trace of soap on my skin, the warmth of the steam clinging to me, but the quiet of the house seemed to swallow that comfort whole. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to convince myself that it was probably nothing, maybe a package delivery, maybe a neighbor checking in, maybe some harmless, unforgettable interruption. But the timing was wrong, the way they knocked was wrong. There was an energy behind it I couldn't explain. My mind flickered back to earlier that day, the moments that had led me here. I'd woken with that heavy weight in my chest, the kind you can't name, only feel. Work had been draining, each conversation feeling hollow, each task mechanical. I'd come home and thrown my bag on the couch, barely touching my phone, craving nothing more than the solitude of a hot shower to wash away everything I couldn't say out loud. And for a moment, in that small, steamy room, I had felt safe. The water had muffled the world, the heat had unwound the knots in my muscles, and for just a little while, I'd convinced myself that I was untouchable. But now, standing halfway down the hallway, I realized how quickly that illusion could dissolve. The knocking had reached right through the walls, right through my fragile sense of calm, and pulled me out. I stopped halfway to the door, my hand resting lightly against the wall, and listened again. No sound. Not even the faint shuffle of feet outside. Were they still there? Had they gone? The uncertainty burned in my stomach. I could have turned back right then, could have retreated to the bathroom, locked the door, pretended none of it happened. But something in me wouldn't let go, wouldn't stop imagining who might be on the other side. I remembered a time years ago, when I'd missed answering a knock like this, and later found out it had been someone I desperately needed to see. I'd promised myself I wouldn't make that mistake again. I took another step forward, my fingers brushing along the wall for balance, and let my mind toy with possibilities. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly showing up. A stranger with news that could change everything. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew exactly who it was, and that knowledge was what made my chest feel so tight. The closer I got to the door, the more aware I became of every detail, the faint smell of the wood, the tiny streaks of sunlight fading through the blinds, the way the shadows pooled in the corners of the room. My bare feet touched the rug in front of the door, the fibers rougher than I remembered, grounding me in the present even as my thoughts drifted somewhere else. I stood there, not yet reaching for the handle, letting the moment stretch until it almost hurt. My hand hovered near the lock, my breath shallow, my heartbeat an unsteady drum. And just as I was about to turn it, I thought I heard it, soft, almost hesitant, the sound of someone shifting their weight on the other side. It was enough to send a shiver straight through me, enough to make me realize that no matter who it was, nothing about my life would feel the same after I opened that door. My hand trembled slightly as my fingers closed around the cool metal of the doorknob, the faint chill seeping into my skin. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on me so heavily it was almost hard to breathe. I could hear the faint creak of the building settling, the slow ticking of the clock on the wall, and underneath it all, the deep, quiet stillness of someone waiting on the other side. The air felt heavier here, thicker, as if every breath I took carried the scent of something about to change. My mind ran through every scenario again, some logical, most irrational. What if it was bad news? What if it was someone I thought I'd never see again? What if it was nothing at all, and I was just standing here in a towel, letting my imagination get the better of me? I swallowed hard, my throat dry, the thin fabric of the towel feeling even smaller now, barely enough to shield me from the vulnerability crawling up my spine. Slowly, I turned the knob, the faint click sounding far too loud in the silence, like a warning I couldn't quite understand. The door cracked open just enough for a sliver of light from the hallway to spill inside, and I could see the outline of a figure standing there. My eyes moved up before I was ready, and the moment they met theirs, the world seemed to still. It was him. The last person I expected. The last person I thought would ever stand here. My chest tightened, a flood of emotions hitting me all at once, shock, confusion, a strange flicker of warmth I couldn't ignore, and an undercurrent of something like fear. His expression was unreadable at first, the kind you stare at too long trying to decode, only to realize it's a tangle of things you might not be ready to understand. We didn't speak. Not at first. The pause between us stretched so wide it felt like it could swallow us whole. I noticed the way his hands were clenched loosely at his sides, like he'd rehearsed what to do with them and then abandoned the plan. His eyes darted for a second, not down at the towel, not anywhere else, just a quick, uncertain flicker, like he was trying to figure out how to start. My grip on the door tightened, part of me wanting to pull it shut again, part of me unable to move at all. There was a history in this silence, one that pressed between us now, thick and unspoken. My mind flashed to the last time I'd seen him, how the air had been sharp with words left unsaid, how we'd walked away without looking back. And yet here he was, in the quiet after my shower, knocking on my door as if the gap between then and now could be bridged with a single visit. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for him to speak, waiting for some explanation that would make sense of this strange, fragile moment. When his lips finally parted, the words didn't come right away. Instead, he stepped forward, not enough to cross the threshold, but enough to make the air between us shift. And then, in a voice low enough that I almost had to lean in to hear, he said something that made my heart stumble in my chest. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't even close. But in that instant, I knew this moment wasn't just about the knock, or the towel, or the shock of seeing him, it was the beginning of something I hadn't prepared myself to face. For a long moment after his words left his mouth, I just stood there, my fingers gripping the edge of the door as if it was the only thing keeping me upright. The sound of his voice still lingered in the air, soft but weighted, carrying something I couldn't quite place, regret, maybe, or longing, or that quiet desperation of someone who had finally run out of time to keep things to themselves. My mind replayed what he had said, over and over, like my brain needed to be sure I'd heard it right. It wasn't just the content of his words, it was the way he'd said them, the way they seemed to break through every layer of distance we'd built between us. I felt the air shift between us, heavier now, almost tangible, like it was wrapping around my shoulders along with the towel. I could see the smallest details about him, things I hadn't noticed in so long, the faint crease between his brows, the way his eyes seemed to hold more than they were letting spill out, the faint tremor in his fingers like he'd been standing here for too long rehearsing something he wasn't sure he could actually say. My own chest felt tight, my pulse pushing against my skin in steady, deliberate beats. I could feel my face warming, not just from embarrassment at my state of dress but from the sudden closeness of emotions I had been carefully avoiding for months. The steam clinging to me from my shower had begun to fade, replaced by a faint chill that made me shiver, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from him standing there. He glanced down briefly, not at me exactly, but at the space between us, as though he was weighing the next step. His voice broke the silence again, and this time it was a little steadier, though still hesitant, like each word was being measured before it left his mouth. He told me something I hadn't known, something that shifted the ground beneath me in an instant. It was about the night we last spoke, about what had really happened after he left, and about why he was here now, standing at my door when we'd both silently agreed we wouldn't cross into each other's lives again. The words painted a picture I didn't want to see, one filled with missed chances, misunderstandings, and truths left in the dark far too long. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes burning in that way they do when tears are threatening but you don't want to give them the satisfaction of falling. I thought about slamming the door, ending it before those emotions could climb any higher, but something in his expression rooted me to the spot. He wasn't asking for forgiveness outright, but it was there, in the way he held himself, in the way his voice softened when he said my name. And then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He stepped back slightly, as if giving me space to decide, but he extended his hand, palm up, not pushing it toward me, not demanding I take it, just holding it there between us like a bridge I could cross if I wanted to. It was such a simple gesture, almost nothing at all, but in that moment, it carried more weight than any apology could. My gaze flickered between his hand and his face, my mind pulling me in two directions, one toward the safety of closing the door, the other toward something I couldn't define but couldn't walk away from either. My breathing felt shallow again, and the silence between us seemed to hum with all the words we weren't saying. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, feeling the weight of the choice settling into my bones, knowing that no matter what I decided in the next few seconds, nothing would ever go back to the way it was before he knocked. I didn't take his hand right away. I just stared at it, hanging there in the space between us like a question I didn't know how to answer. My grip on the doorframe tightened, the wood digging into my palm, grounding me against the strange rush of thoughts crashing through my head. There was so much history behind that hand, every argument, every quiet night, every time we'd laughed until we couldn't breathe, and every time we'd turned away from each other when we should have stayed. It wasn't just a gesture. It was everything we'd been and everything we might still be, all wrapped into something as simple as an open palm. I wanted to ask him why he was here now, why he had waited this long, why he thought this moment, me standing here damp and wrapped in a towel, was the time to come back. But I couldn't force the words past the lump in my throat. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow, and the heat in my skin had nothing to do with the leftover warmth from the shower. He kept his hand steady, not wavering, but there was a flicker in his eyes that told me he wasn't sure how much longer I'd stand here watching him like this. I remembered the night everything had fallen apart between us, how I had stood in another doorway, watching him walk away, thinking that was the last time I would ever see him like this. I remembered the way my pride had felt heavier than my regret, how I'd convinced myself that shutting the door had been the right choice. And yet here I was again, faced with another doorway, another decision, and that same deep ache that came with realizing I might lose something I hadn't been ready to let go of. His voice came again, softer this time, as if he was afraid of breaking the fragile moment hanging between us. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to rewrite what had happened. Instead, he told me he'd thought of me every day since, that he had carried the weight of that night like a stone in his chest, and that being here now was the only way he knew how to set it down. I felt my eyes sting, and I hated that he could still reach me like this, hated that the sound of his voice could crack something I'd tried so hard to keep sealed. My mind told me to protect myself, to keep the door as a barrier between us, but my heart betrayed me, reminding me of the countless times his presence had been the one steady thing in my life. I noticed the small tremor in his extended hand now, the way his fingers twitched as if they were aching to close the gap. And for a moment, I imagined taking it, imagined the warmth of his skin, the quiet pull of his grip, the way that one simple act could undo months of distance. But I also imagined what would come after, the risk of falling into the same patterns, the same pain. My stomach tightened at the thought, a cold, nervous weight settling low inside me. The silence stretched on, the ticking clock behind me suddenly louder, like it was counting down to something I couldn't avoid. I shifted my weight, feeling the roughness of the rug beneath my toes, the towel slipping slightly against my collarbone. My voice finally found its way out, but it wasn't the sharp demand for answers I had imagined, it was barely a whisper, almost a confession. I asked him why now. Why, after all this time, had he decided to come to me, to knock on my door, to bring all of this back? His eyes softened, and for the first time since I'd opened the door, I saw something in them that wasn't guarded, just raw, unfiltered truth. He said because he couldn't carry the silence anymore, because he needed me to know something before it was too late. And in that moment, I realized the decision I made next would either reopen every wound we'd tried to heal or finally let us find a way forward. The weight of that choice pressed against me, and I wasn't sure which one scared me more. The hallway seemed to shrink around us, the walls pulling closer, the air heavier, as though the world outside had faded and left only this space, this moment, this impossible choice pressing down on me. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside, but none of it touched me, not really. All my focus was fixed on the man standing in front of me, his hand still suspended between us, his eyes holding mine with a kind of quiet intensity that made my pulse stumble. I thought about how many days had passed since we last spoke, each one stacking like bricks in a wall I believed was too high to ever climb. And yet here he was, chipping away at it with nothing more than his presence and a few careful words. My fingers twitched against the towel, my mind pulling me in two directions so forcefully it almost hurt. There was a part of me that wanted to step back, to put the door between us again, to protect myself from whatever might come next. But there was another part, a smaller, stubborn, treacherous part, that leaned forward ever so slightly, drawn to the warmth in his gaze, to the raw honesty that I wasn't sure I'd ever seen in him before. He spoke again, his voice steady but low, telling me about the moments since we'd been apart. He didn't give me a neat, polished story. Instead, he let the truth spill out in pieces, unguarded and imperfect. He told me about the nights he almost came here but didn't, the messages he'd typed out and deleted before they could reach me, the things he'd wanted to say but hadn't had the courage to. And then, almost like it slipped from him without his permission, he admitted that not a day had gone by when he hadn't thought about what it would feel like to see me again, to stand here and have me look at him the way I was now, half wary, half unsure, but still listening. His words settled into me, not like lightning, but like a slow, steady rain soaking through everything I'd tried to keep dry. I felt something stir in my chest, something I'd buried deep because it had been too painful to carry. My eyes drifted to his hand again, noticing the faint lines at the base of his fingers, the way his knuckles had always looked when he was holding on to something too tightly. I thought about how those hands had once been familiar, how I'd known their touch without even looking, and the memory made my throat tighten. I didn't reach for him, not yet, but I didn't step back either. Instead, I asked him what he wanted from me, my voice quieter than I intended, almost afraid of the answer. His expression shifted, the faintest shadow crossing his face before he told me the truth. He didn't know. He wasn't here to demand anything, to force me into something, or to rewrite the past in one night. He was here because he had to be, because the thought of never standing here, never saying what he needed to say, was worse than the risk of me turning him away. There was no grand speech, no dramatic plea, just this quiet, unshakable need in his eyes that made my heart ache in a way I hadn't felt in so long. I realized then that I was breathing faster, my chest rising and falling as though I'd been running, and maybe I had been running from this, from him, from the truth that no amount of distance had erased the part of me that still cared. The silence between us deepened, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, alive, full of things neither of us could quite say. My fingers loosened on the towel, my body leaning a fraction closer before I caught myself. I didn't take his hand. I didn't close the door. I just stood there, caught in the space between two choices, knowing that whatever happened next would tip everything one way or the other, and that once it did, there would be no going back. The seconds felt like they were stretching into entire minutes, each one pulling me deeper into the gravity of the moment until it was hard to tell where my thoughts ended and his presence began. My grip on the edge of the door had loosened without me realizing, and the tension that had been coiled tight in my shoulders now ached, like it was begging me to make a choice. His hand was still there, steady, patient, like he had decided that if I needed hours to decide, he would stand here and let the night grow cold around us without moving. I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a performance, not a calculated gesture. This was raw, and maybe that was what scared me the most. We had both been careful people before, each word chosen, each step deliberate, both of us always trying to stay one move ahead of the other. But there was no game in this. No strategy. Just him and me, and the truth sitting between us like a third presence neither of us could ignore. My mind was a storm, 1,000 fragments of memories spinning through it all at once. I remembered the way he used to look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was something rare, something he couldn't quite believe was real. I remembered the nights we'd stayed up until the sky began to lighten, not because we had anything left to say, but because we couldn't seem to let the silence between us become goodbye. And I remembered the way all of that had shattered, the words we'd thrown, the things we hadn't said, the night I'd let the door close between us and told myself it was better this way. I'd believed it for a while, but standing here now, I realized how much of that belief had been survival, not truth. The towel had begun to feel heavy, not just from the water still clinging to my skin but from the awareness of how exposed I was, not in the physical sense, but in the way my heart was no longer hidden behind the walls I'd built. I could feel the heat rising in my face, and it wasn't embarrassment this time, it was something closer to surrender, the pull of wanting to close the distance just enough to feel the weight of his hand in mine again. My breathing was unsteady now, my chest rising and falling in uneven patterns as I searched for the courage to either step forward or finally let him go. And then, as if he sensed the way my thoughts were tipping, he spoke again. His voice was softer than before, almost hesitant, but there was a certainty in the way he said my name that made my knees weaken. He told me he didn't expect me to decide tonight, that he didn't need answers or promises. All he wanted was for me to know that he was here, now, without the armor, without the distance, and that if there was even the smallest part of me that still cared, he would wait. Something about that, about the absence of pressure, unraveled me more than any plea could have. My throat felt tight, my vision blurring at the edges, and I realized there were tears forming, though I hadn't felt them coming. I blinked hard, trying to will them away, but one slipped free, tracing a warm path down my cheek before I could catch it. His gaze softened even further when he saw it, but he didn't move toward me. He stayed exactly where he was, letting me decide if the space between us would close. I looked at his hand again, still open, still steady, and I thought about how many moments in life we don't get back, the conversations that stay unfinished, the people who slip away because we're too afraid to reach out. The weight of that thought pressed into me until my chest ached. And though I didn't take his hand yet, I let my own loosen from the doorframe, my fingers hovering in the space between us, trembling just slightly, caught in that final inch where choice turns into action. For a moment, it felt as if the entire world had narrowed to that fragile inch of space between us, a place so small yet holding the weight of everything we had been and everything we might still become. My fingers hovered there, trembling just enough for me to feel the unsteadiness in my own body, and I could hear my own breathing more than I could hear the quiet hum of the house or the distant murmur of the night outside. I didn't move quickly. Instead, I let myself look at him, really look at him, for the first time in so long. The lines around his eyes were a little deeper, the shape of his mouth a little tighter, as if life had demanded more of him since the last time I'd stood this close. But his eyes, they were the same. The same color, the same quiet way of looking at me like he was searching for something familiar he hoped hadn't disappeared. And maybe that's why my resistance began to slip away, not all at once, but in pieces. I thought of every moment I'd carried him with me without wanting to admit it, how certain places felt emptier without him there, how certain songs became too hard to hear, how even the smallest, most mundane memories could pull me under when I least expected it. The ache in my chest deepened, but this time it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like recognition, like my heart was remembering something my mind had tried so hard to forget. My fingers inched closer, and in that space, I could see his hand twitch, not in impatience, but in the quiet hope that maybe I wouldn't pull away this time. I didn't know if taking his hand would fix anything. I didn't know if it would bring back what we'd lost or if it would just open up old wounds we'd both learned to live with. But I knew this: if I let the moment pass, if I let him turn and walk away again, the silence afterward would be heavier than anything we had carried before. And so, slowly, almost cautiously, I let my fingertips graze his palm. It was such a small touch, barely more than a whisper of contact, but the warmth of it spread through me like something I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. He didn't close his hand right away. He let me choose. And when I finally curled my fingers into his, feeling the familiar weight of his grip, it was like something inside me exhaled for the first time in months. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did he. We just stood there, holding on, the space between us no longer a void but a bridge. The tension that had been coiled inside me began to loosen, replaced by something quieter, not relief exactly, but the beginning of it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if we'd rebuild, if we'd break again, or if we'd find some middle ground where the past no longer haunted us. All I knew was that tonight, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I'd chosen not to let go. And as the warmth of his hand seeped into mine, I realized that maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect moment or the perfect answer. Maybe it was about simply being here, in the mess, in the uncertainty, in the small miracle of having another chance. The world outside the door kept moving, but inside, time felt slower, kinder, as if it was giving us this one fragile pause before life began again. I knew, deep down, that no matter where we went from here, I would never forget this: the knock, the hesitation, the way my heart had fought me and then let me move forward anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who understands the weight of unspoken words. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment that changed you forever? Your story matters here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another heartfelt story.